JB Fabrications fucking JB Fabrications. Justin Bond. How to with Black Stash. What do you want to know, Justin? You want to know what I'm doing?
Yeah, why are you using this stuff?
Well, I don't have a paint mixer. I'm not rich enough to get a paint mixer yet. I mean a shaker. So this is my shaker for right now. This is really thick epoxy, so it's really stirring up down there, I promise. It's been setting for a minute, so it seems like I had this thing going a lot faster. Oh, duh, it's on number 1. Now watch it go. Now watch it go, Justin. Look at that shit. You don't have a paint shaker? Well, shake up your paint with this drill. I wish I had a paint shaker, but I ain't got one yet. You want to do this until it's all consistent with itself. Scrape along the bottom. See if there's any chunks that are coming up with it. If so, keep mixing. This is the fun way to do it anyways. Oh, look at that swirl in motion. Now that I've got the bottom all mixed up, now I'm bringing it up towards the top. You're getting the top mixed in with the bottom. I'll hold it there for a little bit. Oh yeah, look, that thing gets this turbulent. This wanted to jump off the table. It's like mixing concrete slurry, I think. I'm not a concrete guy, but see the motion of it. Works pretty good. Once it starts getting consistent with each other, you can put it right down the bottom, let it turn, and you can actually see everything starting to turn up with itself. Pretty neat, huh? That's the best mixer right there. Doing some epoxy on some bare metal. Some motorcycle parts for Justin. He's got a pretty sweet little bike that he's building up. We're gonna do the seats on it and stuff. He bought these brand new. This we went with we pretty much polished, put a 80 grit polish scratch in our metal, and then we pretty much used that as we prepped, did it in one step, and then we're just gonna go right to epoxy. But we use 80 grit for a reason. We don't go we don't want to do 36 because it'll ruin the metal. Anyways, this is just wax and grease remover right here. Cleaning the metal down. All the wax and grease off of it. We're seeing just how good these 80 grit scratches are in epoxy. They say you can prime over 80 grit scratches. So instead of sanding this all down with your orbital sander with 80 grit, well, we just kept it clean from when we polished all the paint off the bare metal with 80 grit. We found out the polisher does better work stripping down your substrate than anything out there. So we just put 80 grit on our polisher and we just polished all the paint off the bare metal. We pretty much just prepped it out with our polisher. Now we're going to go across it with epoxy. We're cutting steps out. Steps that's not going to be messing around. That's going to keep our quality high and drop our times down processing your repairs. We want them shorter. We don't want to spend all day doing something that we could do differently if we could find a way to do it differently. I gotta get a new rack.
What is this you're working on?
This is a Chevy hood. 82 Chev. We're doing a complete on it. It's getting all brand new metal besides the hood and the tailgate. And so this hood didn't have much material on it, so we was able to get it stripped off pretty fast considering.
What did it take? Less than an hour?
Yeah. And you did the work. You don't have a lot of experience underneath your belt, so you're talking about someone that's kind of a fresh hand, kind of a greenie. We call you guys greenies with no experience. And you was able to strip this hood down, and we prepped it out in an hour. So this thing's ready to prime in an hour. Prepped out, ready. That's what we strive on here at Black Stashes. Finding the quickest, best way.
What's this epoxy you're using? You've never really used it before.
I haven't really used this. Nope. I've heard about this epoxy. I heard it sounds good. So we're gonna.
Why is that important?
So this is like a metal etch. It etches into the metal. If you didn't have this, you would have to go with like a metal etch primer and then a regular 2K primer. So you'd have to use two different products. You'd have to go around it twice as much, or at least 2 more coats. Clean your guns out. So anyways, we're cutting that out. We heard that this thing sands really good, and normally epoxies are sticky. Normally when you epoxy, you do bare metal, sandblasted bare metal, you epoxy it, and then you paint it. You don't even sand it down. You don't want to sand epoxy. Well, we're giving this epoxy a go. We're using it like a 2K primer. I guess it sounds like a 2K primer without using metal etch primer. Has a bigger window. It's better on corrosive purposes. It, you know, has that metal etch technology. So, you know, it's like a metal etching primer into a 2K primer. You know, same with one product. It builds up pretty high.
How many coats?
Huh?
How many coats?
We're gonna do 3. We're gonna do 3. We're gonna be using this epoxy a lot. If it is as good as they say it is. When we go to our Cadillac, we're gonna strip it down with our polisher right here. If you want to find a good stripper, a lightweight stripper, this is it right here. 80 grit on your polisher. Polish all that paint off your metal with 80 grit. And prime it, epoxy it. quickest, fastest way, less of a headache, easy to teach, easy to perform. I had Justin strip this whole hood down in an hour and prep it out, just ready to go in an hour.
You've got some body filler work on this thing.
Yeah, I do.
Like here, and you're gonna do that over the...
I'm gonna do that over the epoxy. So, when you're sandblasting vehicles anyways, so. The purpose of epoxy is really to bring your metal, pretty much it replaces the E-coat. Through the factory, these panels through the factory go in an acid etch, just kind of like gray or green, and then they get dipped into an E-coat. And you can do body filler over those products. But you really don't want to do a whole lot of body filler over 2K primers, because what's holding on 2K primers is a sand scratch. It's not an acid etch into the metal. So with this epoxy, it's biting down into the metal. We're going to be able to go across it with a grit, a piece of sandpaper that's going to hold on to our body filler. So if you're doing restorations, you just went through, sandblasted all your parts, hurry and throw an epoxy, because it'll seal off all your metal. It replaces that E-coat. You're pretty much getting a brand new part from the factory, paintable. That's what epoxy is designed for, really. To spray it on bare metal and paint it in that window. So metal needs that barrier. I've got my fitting going straight into my gun. This is how you dial in your air pressure. You want your dial coming off the end of your hose. This whole setup's normally sitting inside your paint booth. This is desiccant air dryer. It gets a little bit of moisture, but it really captures your oils from your air compressor. I'm gonna set it at 20 pounds. See, as I pull that trigger, this will stay at 20 pounds. It'll keep building air, and the only way it can drop below 20 is if the whole system runs out of air at 20. So this is how you have consistent air pressure. Probably wanted me to show you how to do that, huh? That's okay, yeah. Well, this is your fan. You go all the way to the right is a stream. And then I know this gun, so I know right here when I'm doing primers and clears, my fan pattern's about perfect. This is my fluid control. I have it all the way open and then just dialed in until it starts hitting my trigger when it's cold, so I have a lot of fluid coming out. See the droplets? See how they're really not that big? This is really thick epoxy. So I would say this is atomizing about perfect. This epoxy. You want to spray kind of once or twice coming across here. Then you kind of want to come back in the reflection and see how your gun's spraying.
You might be better right there, Justin. Reflective this way. You can kind of see right here a dull reflection up there if you come over here and video the orange spill and how oriented that coat looks. Kind of move it back and forth and stuff. And that's a perfect coat. Primer, epoxy, however you want, whatever you want to call it. See how we're protecting our environment? The only environment we have. We gotta protect it. The only way that you can paint good is if you can see the reflection, to see how wet your paint looks off the orange spill. If you don't have good lighting, you're not going to be painting very good. You paint in the dark. How wet is this coat?
This is a wet coat.
Pretty wet?
Just wet. You don't want any coat wetter than this coat on anything you do. This is just not a medium wet. It's just a wet coat. Almost like, just like a clear coat, a wet coat. If you didn't have good lighting, you wouldn't be able to see that. Always have your gun straight on your panel, no matter where you're at. If you get on an angle, you're putting overspray out, making your panel dirty before you get to it. Always have it straight on. But yeah, look at that nice orange. So this is really thick material. This gun is badass. I'm using a 1.2 tip on this Techna Pro Light to Velvet. I just have my fluid all the way open until it hits my trigger. On 20 pounds of air. This is a really good gun. I've had this gun since 2015. I've sprayed thousands of gallons through it. I've never rebuilt it. I have replaced the cup on it and the lid about a dozen times. We'll see before a second coat, we'll see more. Like, there's hairs and stuff. I really don't care about that kind of shit, you know? Alright, so how long are we waiting on this epoxy? So before we epoxy this, I spill with my hand, and all these little tiny dings and dents that you see, they were really hard to fill with your hand. So now we have a shiny coat on here. Now we can actually see where all of our damage is. So that shiny coat is to your advantage. You can actually write up a repair plan on those dents after you epoxy it. So we'll just add that into our arsenal. Let's strip it down, get into epoxy, and we can go through, assess the damage if we need to write up an estimated hourly sheet on it. It's been hard to do that without the epoxy. And you know, you could have fixed what you could fill and then prime it, and then there'd be a lot of stuff that you missed. You have to re-prime it again. So you can fix a lot more right off the bat on top of this epoxy right now the way it is. Even if it's just one coat of epoxy. If you want to just come in here, put one coat of epoxy down, walk away, just to seal up your metal. You know you're going to be putting more primer down, fixing it, epoxying it, or priming it again. You know, I just come up with a really good idea. Instead of going across this with like 3 coats of epoxy, I have a lot of damage. So I'm just gonna do this 1 coat of epoxy, and that I'll actually replace the E coat. There's enough primer on there to replace it. So now I can go in, fix this little tiny stuff before we actually waste, before we put more primer on. So I can save those 2 coats of epoxy I was gonna put on and put it on after I fix the damage I can see now. Good idea. Let's do that. Let's spray these though. Your mic parts. Let's use what we have left. There's no dents in this, and we'll use whatever epoxy we have left on your tanks and give it kind of a build. Then we can use it to block the substrate down and make it straight.
You got a special trick for spraying those round areas?
Not really, besides you kind of
kind of have to overlap them tight. You can spray them this way. I'm really just looking for dry spots and filling in the dry spots and making it wet as I go. If I have a little area down in here where paint's not getting, you can actually put this down into a stream like this. It's like a little airbrush. And it'll actually get in those tight little spots. Even if right down in here, the airflow doesn't really hit down there very well. So if you need to, get on a good light where you can see it. You can actually get in those tight little areas. You're painting trailers or something, you got hard to reach areas, can't get in there, put it down to a stream. That's how you get a good clear coat job. You have to make sure you're looking at the reflection, your wetness. Make sure you don't leave any dry spots. And make sure you're not getting it too wet. That's pretty good epoxy, dude. I mean, look at this gouge. Over 2 just regular wet coats. And that thing was deep. And it's actually feeling pretty good. Like this one's almost filled up. I do have enough for about a medium coat. Or if I dial this in, or I don't have a whole lot coming out, I can put another coat across it. Or if you want me to use what's left on the bad spots is what we should probably do, because a lot of this doesn't need another coat.
Yeah.
This epoxy's nice. So what we'll do, these big drag marks that got pressed out from the machine that we could not get out, we'll put some extra epoxy on there. This is a test panel that we're using for this epoxy. There's these straight lines. When this gas tank was pressed out and rolled, they left lines in them, and we've been trying to get them with 80 grit out. It won't come out. So normally you throw some glaze coat across it, and hopefully it doesn't pinch back on you. So we're using this epoxy to fill them up. We're going to set it out in the weather for a while and let the epoxy really harden up really good.
You're just going to put it outside for how long?
I don't know, a couple weeks. Right out in the sun, right in the weather. You know, if rust is going to come through, it's good to find your rust problem spots before you paint it. So, fresh metal, you epoxy it and throw it out in the weather for a couple months if you can, or a couple weeks or a week. If you got any rust spots, go back in there and fix it before you paint it. Less problems.
So this one, you would have put 3 coats on this, and then done your body work, and then after that, more epoxy.
More epoxy.
So
or
you
2K.
saved. Okay.
I just saved a bunch of material.
So now you're gonna do your body work, and then put 2 more coats of epoxy on it, and then block it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what I'm gonna do. We just saved a bunch of product. You know. Yeah, that'd be a good epoxy coat to do body work on. That's something new. We just added to our, added to what we do around here. That's what we strive for, finding better ways. Getting rid of the trash and bringing in the new good stuff. We saved a bunch of product. We just put a coat down. We're going to do the body work. Come back in with a couple good coats of epoxy, maybe even 3 coats of epoxy. Oh, got the camera rolling?
This is how you, when you're priming, this is how you find bad stuff in your primer. See? Down here, these lines, we actually buried them quite a bit. They're still in there. Anyways, just get it on an angle like this. See those lines? You get it on an angle. If you have pinholes and stuff and you're priming, you want to get rid of all your pinholes, well, you put your light on an angle like this and you can see across your whole surface. See what kind of issues you have. Like this one, you can definitely see. That one casts a shadow, you know? So, as we're priming, I'm going to use my light and just fill in the bad spots.
Right here. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Where do they start?
I just use the rest to give you some good film build, something to work with. That's